My guest today is Melinda Tankard Reist. Melinda is an author, speaker, media commentator, and advocate for young people. She's the author and editor of 7 books covering sexualization of young people, the harms of the porn and sex industry, and violence against women and girls. Melinda has appeared on ABC's Q&A, The Gruen Sessions, and many other TV and radio programs. She's the co-founder and movement director of the grassroots campaigning movement, Collective Shout, for a world free of sexploitation. She is also a senior lecturer in the Center for Culture and Ethics at the Notre Dame University in Sydney. In 2024, she received the Global Impact Award at the Coalition to End Sexual Exploitation International Summit in Washington, D.C. This episode really hit me on a deep level. Even though I'm involved in the porn addiction and recovery world, there are so many aspects of the porn industry, and particularly its effect on women and young girls, that don't get a lot of attention. This episode brings some of that to light. Fair warning for you listeners, there are words and phrases that could be potentially triggering or activating for some of you out there who are in recovery, since Melinda and I do get into some of the nitty-gritty content that's out there these days. So please just be aware of that if you're planning to listen. As a reminder, the doors are open for the Unhooked Academy group coaching program, and we still have space for a few more members to join this month. If you're interested in getting support, please sign up for a free discovery call with me, where we'll see if the program is a good fit for you. Currently, we have a special offer for anyone who signs up now, gets lifetime access to the program. So don't wait on this offer. Jump on this opportunity now. And now, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Melinda Tankard Reist.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lipkowitz, and with over 12 years of meditation experience as a mindfulness trainer and coach for high performers, I've become obsessed with helping people break free from compulsive, unhealthy behaviors and addictions and step into a life of true freedom, so that they can finally become their best selves and cultivate deeper and lasting fulfillment. I've created Unhooked, the Breaking Porn Addiction podcast, to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to master your mind and optimize your life. This is Unhooked. So hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Unhooked. I'm your host, Jeremy Lipkowitz. Today, joined by my guest, Melinda Tankard Reist. Melinda, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
I want to jump straight into something we were talking about just before we hit record, which is one of the books that you wrote called He Chose Porn Over Me. And I'm curious to know what inspired you to write that book.
I'm a journalist by background. He Chose Porn Over Me was my 7th title, and I've always been interested in personal lived experiences, particularly of women. And I felt that in the global debate around pornography, the vested interests defending pornography, that we rarely hear the experience of women who are partnered to habitual porn-consuming men. So I wanted to give them an opportunity to share their experiences and to describe what it was like to live in a relationship with a man who basically was willing to sacrifice everything for his compulsive porn use, that porn became the most important thing to him, and that the fallout from that, the trauma, the devastation of relationships, the harm to children, the lack of support for the woman, the gaslighting, the blame shifting on behalf of the man, how it impacted women's physical, mental, spiritual, emotional health, how they often blamed themselves, how they often came to hate their bodies because they couldn't compete with what their partner was seeing in pornography. The book also includes a whole section on resources for partners to be able to get support.
Mm. What were some of the key insights that you found in writing that?
The key insights were the absolute destruction of relationship, the pressure on women to live up to a pornified ideal of them as women, the pressure on them to perform sex acts that they hated, the porn-inspired scripts their partners were following. There were actually two dynamics that happened there. One was either that he became more demanding sexually and wanting to enact on her the signature acts of pornography, anal ejaculation on the face, wanting to involve a third party in the couple's sexual relationships. Choking was significant, that he wanted to strangle his partner and he hadn't wanted to do that before. Or, on the other hand, he showed zero interest in her sexually because what he could get online, the variety, the new hits every day, the more graphic material, she couldn't live after that. She couldn't compete with that. She couldn't be a porn star in the bedroom, a porn performer, and so often hated herself because of that. Thought there was something wrong with her, internalized that, and then the ongoing trauma of having to exit the relationship, often ending up worse financially, or nearly homeless. So yeah, there was a range of experiences like that. Some were younger women that started to feel they had body image issues, that they started to hate their breasts, for example. Started to think they needed to have cosmetic surgery to try to compete. So that was some of the main themes.
Yeah, it seems like there's quite a lot of ramifications, but it's an underground story. We don't hear about it a lot in mainstream media or as a societal topic even.
Well, correct, because the broader narrative is that porn is sexually liberating, that we have to throw off this sort of Victorian era yoke of oppression, that we need to be liberated, that porn helps to achieve that. I mean, these are the scripts of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise and an industrial, porn complex, which, wants to have men using porn all the time, including, boys and younger men grooming the next generation of porn consumers. So how does the suffering partner get hurt in that? Like, how does the suffering partner compete with this, well-financed, well-resourced, global enterprise, predatory enterprise? It's very difficult. And that's, again, one of the reasons that I wrote this book, so that we could hear from women themselves.
Yeah, fascinating. It seems, a lot of people do buy into this narrative that, porn it's liberating, and, you're just being a prude if you think that porn is in any way harmful, that, you're kind of just suppressing sexuality and shaming sexuality. But in some ways, it's the billion-dollar porn industry that's co-opting kind of this liberal ideology, and almost like a wolf in sheep's clothing, saying, no, we're just here to support, kind of an awakening of sexuality, when really they're just trying to get more porn into the eyes of men.
Exactly. More clicks and more profit for an already very profitable industry. And, we're seeing that the fruits of this indoctrination of porn playing out in the lives of couples, in the lives of young people, in the lives of boys. For example, in Australia now, adolescent males 14 to 19 are the largest cohort of sex offenders in general, which we'd never seen before. And not only that, the largest cohort of sex offenders against children. We're seeing this for the first time, and I'm sure this data would be replicated in other countries if they chose to gather it. This data was published in the International Journal of Child Abuse and Neglect in February last year. This is diabolical for society, and not just for individuals, for society as a whole, because it is leading to a de-civilization, loss of empathy, more cruelty, more violence, more sexual harassment, more harmful sexual behaviours in schools, which has become a particular interest of mine, is documenting the rise of sexual harassment in schools, harmful sexual behaviours in schools, peer-to-peer, sexual intimidation, sexual harassment, daily sexual affronts to girls, being pressured to send nudes, being sent dick pics, being turned into AI-generated porn, being sexually groaned at, moaned at, threatened with rape, subjected to rape so-called jokes. Collective Shout, in partnership with the parenting author and expert Maggie Dent, produced this report, Sexual Harassment of Teachers, the SHOT report, late last year. And this report documents widespread sexual harassment of female teachers and female students. Our schools have become sites of abuse, and porn was identified as a driver by the many hundreds of teachers who responded to this survey. So, we've got to ask ourselves, what kind of civilization do we want? Do we want one and just with no empathy, with more violence, with more brutality, cruelty, sexual intimidation, more rape and abuse? Because that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing, porn as a fueling entitlement, putting pre-existing entitlement on steroids, including in young boys.
It's so interesting because it's just another one of these things that doesn't get talked about. My guess is that very few people would have any idea of all this sexual harassment that's going on directed towards teachers, towards female students. And, as you mentioned, all the new and various ways that with technology, AI generated porn and, coercing, your female students to send you nudes, and all the ways that it has evolved beyond what it used to be, even 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stories girls are telling me are getting worse, and they're getting worse younger. Even girls in primary school here, so we're talking 8, 9, 10 years of age, describing being touched, being groped, being hassled, being demanded to send nudes, being threatened with rape if they don't send nudes, being compared to the bodies of porn stars, being asked for sexual acts at school, boys trying to choke them. I had a teacher tell me a chilling story. She said she overheard 2 12-year-old boys talking about sex. And one boy asked the other boy, "How do you know when you're having sex?" And the second boy replied, "When she starts to cry." Right? Now, this is not a natural, innate response. This is a learned response from a boy that he's seen porn, and he sees women being violated, being degraded, being forced into submission, being dominated, and he thinks that's what sex is, that women should be in pain, they should be crying, they should have mascara pouring down their cheeks, because the most popular genres of porn are the most violent. And this is often their first introduction to sex, is seeing violent, degrading, rape-themed sadism, torture, incest porn, which is very popular. And they think that this is what human sexuality looks like. This is a crime against children, really. It's a mass act of global child abuse to deform their developing sexual templates in this way, because how will they be able to have a respectful relationship based on mutuality and giving and self-sacrifice and something truly connected and intimate? That's being lost, that's being smashed out of them because the global porn industry is now the largest department of education in the world. That's where they're going to learn about sex, which is a tragedy for them. It's a tragedy for girls, and it's a tragedy for society as a whole.
Yeah, one of the things that I think about often is it's not just the boys who are getting this education on this is what sex is supposed to look like. Young girls are getting this education too, because they're
Correct.
seeing these things also.
Totally. Yes, they are. And more girls think that they need to submit to violent, degrading acts. More girls think they should enjoy anal sex when they don't. They're expected to provide oral sex just, routinely. They're expected to want to have their hair pulled, to be ejaculated on their faces, to be choked and strangled, and they think there's something wrong with them if they don't enjoy it. We have evidence of girls who are actually, from speaking to doctors, who are ending up with colostomy bags. They're not being warned this is what might happen to you because these acts are so glamorized and glorified, and because the magazines they read tell them they should enjoy it. and this is what, sexual empowerment looks like, then if they don't enjoy it, they think it's because they're too, hung up and prudish and there must be something wrong with them. I asked a 15-year-old girl once about her first sexual experience, and the only thing she could articulate was that he seemed to enjoy it. She said, I think my body looked okay because he seemed to have a good time. I said, but what was it like for you? And she couldn't actually articulate that because she didn't think it should be enjoyable or pleasurable for her. She was there just as an aid to his orgasm, essentially as a masturbatory aid. This is what girls are learning, that there should be no real intimacy or connection. They don't expect romance. They don't expect kissing. Kissing is way too intimate. There'll be many other acts before there's a kiss. In fact, one story told to me was a boy said to a girl, if you give me a blowjob, I'll give you a kiss, So
It's just bonkers what's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be funny if it weren't so disheartening and so sad
well,
and tragic.
absolutely.
Yeah.
They've never held hands, but they're using their hands to choke a girl. Like, they've never actually held hands. They don't have any of the kind of soft romantic skills.
Mm.
It's straight into hardcore sex acts, straight out of porn. So the scripts of the global sex industry are what is guiding the expression of sexuality we're seeing in many, young people's relationships.
If someone's listening to this, and I'm asking this question a little bit as in kind of devil's advocate, because I know there's some people out there who maybe they don't really know the state of what, modern hardcore internet porn looks like. And they say, well, there's ethical porn out there and you're just exaggerating, it's not all that bad. What would you say to someone who says
I would
that?
say, firstly, how many men do you reckon are Googling ethical porn? 0.1% maybe. There's no such thing as dolphin-friendly porn, really. I've had a look at some of the so-called ethical porn, and one of the, better-known ethical porn producers produced a genre which was mother-daughter lesbian fantasies. Like, I don't know, who's defining ethical here? Like, who's defining it? Is mother-daughter fantasies, is that ethical? Yeah, I would question that. The fact is that even if there was, and I don't believe there is, but even if there was, it's so at the margins. The most common, popular, mainstream title depict rape, sadism, torture porn, incest porn, bestiality, for example. So, I don't think we need to focus on the margins here, and the margins themselves are questionable. Let's look at what, most porn consumers are consuming and the global data for the negative outworkings of that, what that leads to, sexual terrorism in the home, children learning about not about learning about making love and building a meaningful relationship. This is an act of social arson. And we've taken away the guardrails which might have once, protected children. Now they see rape porn at the click of a button and they think this is, normal human sexuality.
Mm. Wow. It's I talk about this on a weekly basis, but even still for me, just hearing this, it's so disheartening to think about what young, I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a 10 or 12-year-old girl right now.
Yeah. Well, it's terrible. I mean, I've met little girls who are on 24-hour-a-day suicide watch because of the sexual bullying from the boys in their primary school. Girls with eating disorders, girls with high anxiety, mental health problems being medicated. I have girls say to me, I don't want to go to school anymore because schools have become trauma zones. They've become trauma wards and children don't want to go there. Why would you want to go there? We're seeing a rise globally of school refusal and absenteeism. And it was a group in the UK whose name I've just momentarily forgotten, but it will come back to me, who actually wrote a piece about linking the violence at school, the sexualized violence on the school grounds, with this rise in absenteeism. And that had always been my theory, but I hadn't really seen any data to prove it. But I believe it's true because of what girls tell me, every day in schools in this country, thousands of girls, they don't want to be there. They don't feel safe there. They have a right to be safe at school, but they don't feel safe at school. And this is a public health crisis that needs urgent intervention, because boys have been groomed to behave in these ways. They weren't born like this, but pornography has taught them to behave in these ways. That they're seeing porn on social media. They don't even have to go to a porn site. They're seeing, sexualized media everywhere in society. Pornified portrayals of women in the shopping centers. Pornified portrayals of women in advertising, media marketing, music videos, for example, in gaming. And again, they think this is normal, but it's not their fault. It's the adults actually that have allowed this to happen and are responsible for the global rise in sexual crime as a result of leaving children to these devices.
Yeah, the topic of just female objectification and the objectification of women and women's bodies. You would think that as we progress as a society, things would get better, but in some ways, it's weird because it feels like it's getting worse, but we're almost gaslighting ourselves into thinking that it's getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. If everything that the porn industry, the sex industry promised came true, we would have the ideal society, and we certainly don't. Things have got worse. And there's more cruelty, suffering, brutality, and more racism. I have young women of colour in schools telling me boys come up to them and say, "You're my dirty little sex slave." This is straight out of porn, that women of colour are sex slaves. Latino girls telling me they're routinely subjected to tropes about Latino women, from pornography. There's entire genres of indigenous porn depicting indigenous women. How do we get rid of racism? We say we're against racism, and meanwhile it gets a free pass on our biggest porn sites. Porn is a dispenser of the porn industry. Porn platforms are a dispenser of misogyny and racism, and have been given a free pass for decades.
Why do you think this is a topic that gets so little airtime? Like, why do you think we don't talk about this in society?
When I get asked questions like that, I say, follow the money trail. There's a lot of money in this. The porn industry, I think now makes more than the drug and weapons industry combined. I need to check the exact stats there, but it's right up there with, the biggest money making industries in the world. And another major factor is that many of the particularly male decision makers in this world are consuming porn. They're not going to want limits on porn. What we saw a few years ago here in Australia was when there were moves to rein in the internet and to require mandatory internet filtering. The sex industry said, we're going to release the names of MPs who we know use the porn industry, who are, on our database. So, our global leaders, given what we know statistically about the number of men who consume porn, many of those will be our decision makers, right? So they're not going to speak out about this when they're jerking off to it every night after leaving Parliament, if I can be so direct. But that's the reality, you don't let regulation get in the way of your ejaculation. And that's a problem. We also have a problem with so-called free speech, particularly in the US, where things that we think don't warrant free speech protection get free speech protection. So, in Australia, we're a little bit stricter in that regard. We ban things here that aren't banned in, for example, the US and other countries. In Australia, we've banned, for example, child sex abuse dolls. These are replica children's body parts, anatomically correct, lifelike. They can be custom made. Men send in pictures of children that they want replicated in a penetrable doll. And most countries in the world allow that. Australia doesn't. We define that under our laws on child sexual exploitation material, thankfully. Some other genres of porn depicting children that are allowed in other countries, like cartoon versions. We don't allow that here. So sorry, that's a bit of a rambling answer, but I think they are some of the factors that the money, money buys power, money buys influence. These are very powerful institutions which are often protected by politicians, political leaders, because they're into it. They're into it themselves. Having said that, I think your listeners might need to hear some better news, and that is at last there has been a reckoning, particularly with Pornhub, owned by MindGeek, now ALO, headquartered in Canada, which has been forced to take down tons of videos which depicted rape, which used non-consensual images, which depicted, real women who had been drugged, who were then raped and filmed, which also used porn created by using the bodies of children who'd been trafficked. And that campaign has been led by a remarkable woman called Lila Micklethwaite, who has just written a book called Takedown. And Collective Shout, the organisation that I founded with some friends 15 years ago, has been part of that global campaign. So at last there has been a reckoning, and the Canadian Parliament's Ethics Committee called before it the executives of Pornhub to explain why they had allowed this content. There are now over 100 women suing Pornhub in civil actions for the non-consensual use of their imagery. They had been they'd been drugged, images used, some of them were children, and now we're seeing those civil actions. So this has taken a very long time, but at last some of those truths have come out, and there was a major spread on this in the New York Times, which really helped to kick along that campaign.
Yeah, so I guess the big answer there is if there's a lot of money behind it, just follow the money.
Follow the money.
I do think there's also something about the topic of sex and sexuality that it's just, for some reason, it's taboo, and it makes people uncomfortable. And because of that, it gets almost this free pass to sneak in the back door and go unregulated to a certain extent.
Yeah, sure. I just think we don't always talk about sex and sexuality in a healthy way. But any attempt to do that gets drowned out by this industry, which is, indoctrinating a whole generation into to violent sex. I mean, in some of the most popular porn is the theme is non-consensual. So how do you teach consent? Like, some of us are trying to teach consent, but that's being undermined every day by an industry which teaches that not consenting is actually really sexy. Taking, conquest, domination, force is actually sexier than the true expression of consent. We're eroticizing violence, eroticizing inequality, eroticizing racism. Porn is just show reels of abuse, and it's very hard to get cut through with something that is a healthy message about human sexuality based on empathy and mutuality, mutual respect, and, dare I say it, love, which is not a word we hear very often.
What can we do about this?
Well, we have to fight it on many fronts. It takes a whole community approach, because we're up against something that is just so powerful, and unprecedented assault, on all of us, really, but particularly on the sexual development of children. So what do? Well, we have to call it out. We have to call out this industrialized, commercialized, commodified version of sexuality. We at Collective Shout do a lot of research. We publish a lot of research. We appear before parliamentary committees, providing that global data, that global evidence, which is solid. It's really solid on what porn is doing, particularly to a generation. The role of porn as a driver of violence is acknowledged in Australia in a report by Our Watch on porn and violence in teen relationships. It's acknowledged in our national plan of action to address violence against women and children porn as a driver. At least we have that acknowledgement now. This was being denied 10 years ago. You know, some of us were lone voices for a long time when it's not we're not so alone now. So call out the truth, give weight to the experiences of women, like the women in my book who chose porn over me. Give weight to the experiences of girls in schools and teachers in schools, which we have documented in this sexual harassment of teachers report, which you can find on the Collective Shout website, collectiveshout.org. We need our governments and our regulatory bodies to step up to the plate to at least agree to protect children from early porn exposure, being exposed to porn, racism, torture porn, sadism, rape, incest porn at the click of a button. Let's agree, let's find common ground at least with our children and put in protections in place. For example, age assurance, age verification. We have a trial of that going on in Australia right now, holding this industry to account, supporting civil actions by women against this industry, supporting criminal actions for accountability, transparency. These industries which have caused, just untold damage to society as a whole. There are a few ideas.
Wow. I mean, it just feels such a huge undertaking. It's so hard to shift the momentum of this.
Yes,
this
it is.
Massive thing.
It really is. But when I feel overwhelmed by it, I remind myself of, for example, boys who contact me and say, after hearing you speak, I stopped using porn. After hearing you speak, I realized that I had become, a patron of this global industry. They used to tell themselves, oh, it's harmless. I'm just looking. The women seem to be enjoying it. And then they realized that every click, every download was fueling the global trade in the bodies of women and girls into the production of pornography, that they were complicit, and they had an ethical awakening. And they contacted me and said, I haven't used it since. The women that have contacted me and said, your book helped me because before I thought it was just me. I thought there was something wrong with me. And now I feel less lonely. I recognize, thousands of women are experiencing the same things I did. And that gives them confidence to speak out. The girls in schools that say, I'm allowed to say no. It's like this radical notion, this radical idea. After hearing me speak, I say, what did you take from this message? And I say, oh, we realized we're allowed to say no. Like this shouldn't be so revolutionary, but apparently it is. I used to get young girls say, how do I say no without hurting his feelings? And now they realize, they're allowed to say no, and they shouldn't be pressured and forced to do things they don't want to do. They understand what the law says, that this constitutes sexual harassment if they're being sexually groaned at, grunted at, moaned at, if they are being propositioned, threatened with rape, if they don't send nudes, send unwanted dick pics, turned into AI porn. But these things are all against the law, and they have a right to report and to speak out and complain. So I have to kind of break it down and just remind myself, these individual people have been helped. And we're also seeing more of a global acknowledgement of the harms of this industry. We're seeing more young people saying we don't want this for our lives, for our sexuality. We're seeing more men like yourself speaking out about this, trying to help other men to understand that porn is toxic to their ability to form a loving, intimate relationship. It's toxic to them, toxic to the women in their lives, and toxic to society. So more men are speaking out, and we've had long-term male allies like Paul Laverne, who and Robert Jensen, and people of that caliber. Here in Australia, Steve Biddulph and Clive Hamilton, people like that. And, it's great to see more men resisting the toxic scripts of pornography, wanting something better. To me, that's where the hope lies. It's in this younger generation of resistors who want something better for their lives. So I have to find hope there. And with our global allies working in this space, it's still a massive task. There's no doubt about it. But at least history will show we tried.
Yeah. Do you have any, research, studies, statistics that kind of showcase how this harms relationships or how this harms men or women? And I'm asking this question because I'm thinking of, people who might have never really thought of this. Maybe they're not aware of what's going on in schools. Maybe they're, middle-aged man and they just think, oh, this is harmless. Are there any statistics that you often go to that can kind of shine a light and say, hey, this is actually, we have studies to show this is how it's harming you?
Yeah. But there's so many studies now. There's so many. We've documented some of them on our website at Collective Shout in the research section. We've documented many of the studies in our submissions, which you can also find on our website. If you go to Collective Shout and campaigns, the drop-down box will give you our high-level submissions to state and federal governments, to regulatory bodies, to global bodies like the United Nations, for example, where we have curated much of that research and brought it together. There's research in my earlier book called Big Porn Inc., exposing the harms of the global pornography industry. Organizations like the National Center on Sexual Exploitation has research there. Culture Reframed, for example, Fight the New Drug, and other like-minded groups. It's not that hard to find the data, really. There's a lot more of it these days than there was even a decade or so ago. The UK Children's Commissioner has written a couple of very excellent reports, including basically It's Just Abuse, I think from a couple of years ago, which has a lot of data in it as well. And in Australia, Our Watch, Our Peak Body, Addressing Violence Against Women, has collated a lot of the data there too, particularly as it relates to teenage relationships.
Yeah. Going back to your book, He Chose Porn Over Me, I know it because I've worked with many men that a lot of guys in relationships are unaware of the impact they're having on their partner. They might have a sense that they're hiding something or what they're doing isn't quite right, but they're not aware of the extent to which they're hurting their partner, hurting their relationship. I'm curious if there's anything that you would want to say to someone who maybe is aware that there's some issue. I mean, they're listening to this podcast because they're aware that something's wrong, but they're not necessarily aware of the extent to which it might be harming their partner.
Well, I think if they are listening to this podcast and if they do care about their partner, ask some questions. Like, women do give a lot of signals, in the body signals they give, perhaps their resistance, their lack of pleasure, their lack of enjoyment. Often they can feel used or just like a piece of meat. Sometimes they just feel like they're a masturbatory aid. If he's consuming porn, he should be alert to changes in the relationship. Does he prioritize his porn over her? Does she feel neglected? Does she feel less desirable, less attractive? What's really going on? What does he want in the relationship? Because, he can't defend his porn and his humanity at the same time. He can't have both. He can have his porn, but he can't have an authentic, intimate relationship with his partner. And men that I know that have given up consuming porn, many of them did it because they actually cared for their partner and they recognized that she was being harmed. Obviously, I'm talking about heterosexual relationships here because that's what I've mostly looked into. But they've recognized that something has been lost from the relationship, from the intimacy they once had, even from their friendship, their bond, their exclusive bond. The trust has been eroded. So perhaps you could ask her some questions and give her the chance to open up safely, not dismiss her or gaslight her or say, well, I'll give it up if you give me more sex, or if you could only be hotter, or if you could have cosmetic surgery, or, if you could perform these acts that I see in porn, then I won't have to look at porn, or if you make porn of yourself and send that to me. No, if you really want to quit it, get help yourself. And she shouldn't have to police these behaviors, which a lot of men expect. get help and show you're serious. Like I've met men who like literally smashed their phone or smashed their computer to show they were serious. Like they had to do very serious things to get free of it, but they were willing to take those steps.
Mm.
Ask yourself how much the relationship means to you, and is it really worth? Is your porn use really worth the sacrifice of your relationship?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. One of the things that I always recommend if somebody asks me about that is just have a conversation. Have an open, honest, curious conversation about what your partner's experience is, what their thoughts on it are, because so much of the time it's just in the dark. There's
Yes.
just there's no awareness of it. It's just a hidden behavior that they're hiding from their partner.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And ask yourself, is this going to set you up for a successful, loving, intimate, caring relationship? Because all the evidence is that, that it won't. You're partaking in something that is eroding your relationship. Many of the women experience it as cheating, as unfaithfulness, and that's not going to be good for her. It's not going to be good for the relationship. But also ask yourself what you're doing, broader than that. What are you doing for humanity? Because this is eroding civilization. It's setting up society for failure. Like, how do you sustain a healthy civilization when, vast numbers of men are consuming hardcore, violent, misogynist, racist porn? Like, how's that going to work out for us? So, you ask yourself, do you want to be complicit in creating that kind of a society? Like, do we want to live in that kind of society? This is a question that Robert Jensen has asked. He says porn is what the end of the world looks like, and I think he's right.
Mm-hmm. It's a great thing to reflect on. I mean, there are these movies. Some of them are funny, but they, like, I don't know if you've seen Idiocracy.
No.
Oh, it's phenomenal. It was, I think,
Yeah, I'll
came out
write it
maybe
down.
15, 20 years ago, but it is so on point in terms of where our society is headed. It's a comedy.
Yeah.
But that, and then there's also, what was this one? Wall-E.
Yeah.
You remember
Oh,
Wall-E?
yeah.
And
I've heard of it.
humans were just kind of like fat blobs that couldn't move anywhere. We're just kind of plugged into screens in front of them. And
Yeah.
in some ways, it's like, the actions that each of us is taking is either contributing to that or moving further away from it.
Absolutely. David French has said that sex without love is a danger to human hearts. And I think we're actually seeing, I don't want to say the death of love, but, a significant erosion of love. As I said earlier, we don't hear young people in school talk about love. Until recently, I asked girls, what do you want boys to know? And I've collected so many answers, which is going to be informing my next book on boundary setting for girls. And one girl said, we want love, not sex. I thought that was fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
We want love and not sex. So I think we want to rebuild love and the desire for love, the aspiration for love, because I think that's what we're losing. We're severing boys from their humanity. We're driving the empathy out of boys from the youngest of ages. Boys are actually born quite soft-hearted. I have 4 children, 1 son. And he was born very soft-hearted, but you see how the culture tries to smash that out of them, and the Andrew Tates and other copycat Andrew Tates that, the boys follow, and
there's a lot of bad influences out there.
A lot of bad influences fall on them. And how do we rescue their humanity, their empathy, their softness? How do we rescue that so that a loving, healthy, sustainable civilization is possible?
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, I loved having you on. I know you're a busy woman. You've got another meeting to head to right after this. So just a final question is, where can people find out about Collective Shout? Where can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, we'd love your listeners to get involved. CollectiveShout.org is our website. We're on all the socials. I'm on all the socials as well. Melinda Tankard Reist, Mel Tankard Reist on Instagram. I think I'm Mel Tankard Reist on Twitter as well. We'd love to have your support and involvement. Obviously, the porn industry is a global industry. There's no borders. The internet has no borders. So these are global issues affecting all of us. So yeah, we'd love you to get involved, get on our mailing list, and we can help you run campaigns in your countries. We run a lot of campaigns. Last year was our record year, 34 victories against corporations who objectify women, sexualize girls. We're running global campaigns against AI undressing and nudifying apps, for example, 127 apps that will instantly undress any woman, any girl, and turn them into porn. This is happening in our schools, where schoolboys are becoming self-appointed porn producers using photos of schoolgirls from their social media or from the school, official school photos, and morphing them into porn. We're trying to get these apps banned around the world, 127 of them. We're trying to get a global ban on child sex abuse dolls and replica child body parts, anatomically correct, lifelike, custom made to look like real children. These are global campaigns. We'd love your support on those, and we can help you to run campaigns in your local communities as well.
Well, we'll definitely link all of that in the show notes for the episode.
Great.
Mel, it's been fantastic and heartbreaking having you on the show. So, but really, thank you for the work that you're doing, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity, Jeremy. I really appreciate it, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, folks, that's it for today. We will catch you guys on the next episode.